welcome to another episode of Coffee Talk. I'm Charles Neal, and we have the privilege of having Clem Cheng with us today. It's also Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and so we have a dual treat because we get to hear not only from Clem about his leadership experiences, but also he can share with us a little bit more, crack the seal a little bit more on certain things personal to him. So Clem, thank you for showing up for us today. We appreciate you.
Charles, it's actually a pleasure and honor to be here with you, especially since some of the great leaders that you've had on these coffee talks, like Steve White, Kia Painter, and whatnot. Thank you for sharing some of their videos. Really enjoyed watching those.
Oh no, listen, when Marge introduced us, I think it was last year.
Yes.
At that moment, I already had this pinned in my head. So nope, we got to get him.
That's fantastic. I'm getting to know you a little bit. I'm not surprised at all to hear you say that. So
we got to get him. Yeah. So typically, we start these calls, and I'm like, oh, talk to me about your leadership experience, etc. But a couple of days ago, I read a post that you put in where you were sharing a little bit more about your personal life than just looking at the regular corporate stuff that you've been put out there. And before I forget, everybody, Clem is a philanthropist. He is a coach. He's led large HR teams for numerous organizations in the multi-billion-dollar revenue per year space. So I'm remiss if I didn't mention that. They're like, well, what makes Clem so important and special and all these different things? No, Clem is a rock star, y'all. So Clem, before we get into your journey, tell us about how your family's impact, how they came over and the impact they've had on you that allows us to even have this conversation, right?
Well, thank you so much for asking about that. And, Charles is referring to the LinkedIn post that I put up a few days ago. And, for me, it was actually a moment to be just a little bit more vulnerable. Typically, my LinkedIn posts tend to be very professional oriented, where I use Facebook and Instagram and so forth to share a little bit about, my personal life and whatnot. So this blended a little bit of both on through LinkedIn, and it felt appropriate for AAPI Heritage Month, which you referenced, Charles, that just started in May. And it was a chance to really just honor my parents. Both my parents have passed, my father just about a year ago, my mom about 7 years ago. And it was just a moment for me to really reflect and also share with others that, they had interesting journeys to immigrate to the US. And I'm so fortunate to be here, in this country. And I'm also so fortunate for all the incredible experiences and traits and characteristics that were really passed down from both of my parents. My mom was a social worker for much of her life. And, it really left a big impact on me with helping others that are less fortunate and doing the most to help bring others along. My father was a little bit of a hard-headed person. Who was a lifelong learner, though, and he really instilled that in me. And it's something I've tried to adopt as a professional, to continuously learn. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit more. So thank you for asking, and for those of you who are interested, please feel free to go out and take a look at the link that I posted. I actually had some information on their obituaries that share a little bit about their life history.
Reflection is a gift, right? Because it allows us to, not just honor, but have a little level of introspection, especially as we start to get a little older. You're trying to figure out, why am I the way I am, right? So thank you for that. So now, let's talk about your career, right? I don't necessarily have to hit on each of them, but what are the highlights as you start looking at, your early beginnings? Because you weren't necessarily from training slated to be an HR professional. I mean, economist and computer science, etc. And then all of a sudden, you're sitting in the world of running or helping run multinational organizations on the HR scene, right? So how did that happen?
Yeah, well, First of all, thank you for taking a moment to study about my background, Charles. So I'm pretty amazed about that. Yeah, you nailed it. From an education standpoint, I was actually a computer science major and an econ major, so I was a double major. I did do a summer internship as a software developer for a bank when I was in college. That was a great summer because it helped me realize that that track for me of being, a software developer was not going to be my career. I just met so many people who were way better at that than I was. Now, fortunately, it taught me great skills though, because when you learn how to, code, you learn how to break down problems, you learn how to analyze things, you know how to, create process flows and things of that sort. So that helped me incredibly throughout my career. You also study a lot of math. So, I've always been more quantitative than, a lot of the HR folks that I've worked with. My career in, my first stint out of college, I was with Citibank for, a good run, about, a total of about 13 years. Half of that was in operations and various leadership roles, in back office stuff, customer service, things of that nature. And then I spent the other half in HR. And then, from there, I pivoted, and worked for a few different companies in human resources. I think what sticks out for me is that, I kind of got a little bit lucky finding a profession of the profession of human resources where it's a function that every company needs. And so it enabled me to pivot across industries a lot easier than if you're following kind of a technical track and you become a real, specialist in a specific product area or line of business or something. It's not always as easy to move across industries. But if you're in a functional position like human resources or finance or legal or something like that, you are able to move across an organization and industries and so forth. Now, with that said, when you're in HR, you don't end up typically, I mean, I've met people who have become, general managers and CEOs out of HR, but that's much less common. So you're also not generally going to be running the organization. But for me, it ended up being a great fit because my passion in my career and in life has really been helping develop talent, helping support others, helping people be at their best, helping create cultures that allow people, to bring their full self, to be able to contribute to the highest level, to feel fulfilled and engaged. So those things were really, what sustained me in terms of my interest in human resources. Um,
So I get the frame, right? The frame of it is I want to enable people to be their best selves. When you're doing it with 5, 10, but you did it at a scale, right? So talk to me about how you compartmentalize or not as you're going up I mean, so let me ask you this question and I can reframe it based off of that. At a certain point, let's say with your Xfinity role, you were helping support from an executive leadership, how many tens of thousands of employees,
yeah, that's right.
right? And so, as you're going up that funnel, that pyramid, you had to affect the leaders that were leading the leaders. How did you help build those teams out and get them to buy into that culture that you were trying to achieve in building out a strong organization?
Yeah. Wow, that's a really great question. For a bunch of different reasons. Because I think, to do that work for me, what I learned over the course of my career, it happens both at a one-to-one, like literally a person-to-person level, but then also at a team level and then an organization-wide level. And all of those things, there's a little bit of overlap, but when you get down to the one-to-one level, a lot of it is really just fostering a real relationship, coming in, with empathy and humility, whether you're dealing with an executive in the C-suite or if you're working with a retail store employee, or a customer service professional that's on the phone. I think you can learn a lot, and you can bring those learnings back to create, better processes, better systems, better culture, better tools, at an organization-wide level. So I did a mixture of trying to really be accessible for employees, all the way from the front line up. When, in fact, when I would get an email, it didn't happen a lot, but, I would get at least a few emails a month from, frontline employees that were reaching out on a question about something. And, I would try to answer those before any other of my emails, just because I thought if somebody had the courage to reach out to me, I really owed them a quick response. But at an organizational level, Charles, I think, you're really looking at systemic things to create like a healthy, vibrant culture. You're looking at the structure of the organization. You're looking at, the communication environment. Does it flow? Is it open? Do people actually are they able to express themselves, honestly, candidly? Fortunately, today, companies have so many different listening mechanisms, whether it's employee surveys or employee NPS, or actually looking at data to see, where are pockets of employee turnover happening, and trying to analyze why is that occurring. So there's a lot of different mechanisms, that are available to understand the real pulse of what's happening. And you just have to, I think, break down and, analyze like what are the different mechanisms that are going to help you create, a better environment.
I'm over here taking my notes, right? So, so you're an econ major, or you had econ background. Our economy has had fluctuations, right? For multiple reasons, right? So productivity becomes a conversation that says, hey, you mentioned tools earlier, you talked about data analytics, etc. I want to ask you a question through two different lenses. One, the HR professional lens, and then the other, the employee lens. On the HR professional lens side, and the answers may be close, but still, right? I'm an HR professional. I want to grow within the organization. I want to stay relevant. With the tools that are out there, and the tools are AIs, any analytics-based tool, etc., how should I structure my next 1 to 3 years if I want to stay relevant and to progress in, my career path?
Well, that another great question, Charles, and it kind of gets back to at the beginning I was mentioning, adopting that trait that my father had of just being a lifelong learner. And I think whether you're a leader in the business, an HR professional, or a frontline employee, I mean, there's honor and value in all the different roles that exist within companies. But to remain, to use your word, to remain relevant, it's really incumbent on all of us to continually learn and grow. It's, and I think it's particularly important today. It's always been important, but the pace of change is just, evolving rapidly. I mean, think about the data and analytics space where that's exploded over the last 7 years. I mean, it's incredible. You read like, ridiculous statistics like the amount of data being produced in one day, across all these different systems that exist in the US equals like a year, like, 10 years ago or something. Yeah.
No, right? Yeah.
But so that would be one example. And you mentioned AI, that's another. In fact, I'll give you a little bit of example. So I cheated a bit to prepare for this discussion with you. I went into Chat GBT and I put in, what should I talk about when I'm giving a career discussion coffee talk? I got an outline back. So
But we know all that did was say, yeah, okay, I knew that. It was structure, it wasn't content.
yeah, that's right. Yeah. But there are little tidbits that I got out of that I certainly, have already weaved in, to it. But I think it really comes down to continuing to grow your skill set, your capabilities, your knowledge base. And what gives people an edge to continue to grow their careers is definitely a combination of being results oriented. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what we're all paid to do when we're part of an organization, is produce results. And so for the people who really can, truly put points on the board, not just do the activity, where they're busy and everything, but actually, kind of, to use sports analogies, move the ball forward, put the points on the board. That's really, going to give you a platform of credibility. That alone, though, isn't enough, because you have to have relationships. People have to like working with you. Um, people, I think to be effective in influencing, you have to really show up as a human and be able to relate to people and, influence and whatnot. That's, I think that's equally as important. Um, and then the third leg of the stool is, I think, some of the skills and knowledge that we're talking about, continuing, to always grow your capabilities, learn new things, kind of move where the puck is going.
So you're now in that coaching arena as well. And I'm pretty sure you're going up and down the scales of the levels of people in their functional roles. But you're having a conversation with now people who may be vice presidents, senior vice presidents, and above. What's that coaching like for them, as opposed to individuals who may be more facing, or maybe mid-level and below? Is there a difference in how you approach your coaching that allows for maybe more strategic versus tactical? Or I'm not sure. I'm just throwing things out to see what sticks right now.
Yeah, so there are differences. I think, when it comes to helping somebody be the best they can be, there's some elements of how to do the coaching that are really consistent, in terms of, understanding how a person views their own strengths and weaknesses, helping the person, get a little bit of a 360 view of how others view that individual, both in terms of their performance and their potential, and their relationships and things of that sort. So those things, I think, are more similar than dissimilar, regardless of level in the organization. But you hit it, though, when you talk about somebody who's in, a different kind of role, that's maybe, frontline facing, customer interacting, versus somebody who's a CEO. There's one person that, that I'm working with recently that is a CEO, and, there's a lot of different demands. That person has to think about not only their leadership team and how to develop that, and how to make sure that, the P&L is where it needs to be, because they won't have a long runway if they don't get the P&L kind of, in a good place. But then they have to think about the board, making sure that the communication of the board is effective, that they're engaging the board and influencing the board in the right way. Then they have to think about the community, that they operate in, and what some of the dynamics are there and whatnot. So definitely, when you look at the different roles, there are different dimensions to help somebody, think about and really, have a plan for how they're going to be as effective as they can be in their different constituents and so forth. But a lot of the elements, though, of coaching are similar. Well, one of the things that some people I've met over time, they're very successful executives, and they're not really keen on getting any coaching because they've clearly been very successful to get where they are. What I'd like to remind people is, and it's a little bit back to a sports analogy. The world-class athletes still have a coach.
That's right.
And so the people who are at the very, very top, you're not even talking 0.01%. It's even less than that. The people who are the Olympic athletes or the NBA players or whatnot, they all need coaching. So why shouldn't we all, benefit from that?
Do you make a distinction between coaching and mentorship?
I think there are differences there. I think the coaching, you're in a position often, like if you're a team leader, you're both being a manager and a coach, right? You get to actually see your players, on the field day to day, operating, in the work environment, and that's a great advantage because you can see, what they're doing really well, and help support that and amplify that and recognize it, and you can also see where they hit walls and so forth. And so you can coach, help coach and, work around through those obstacles and whatnot. When you're mentoring somebody, you often don't have those same kinds of opportunities to actually see somebody doing the work. So I think, the nature of your conversations tends to be different. As a mentor, I think you're often trying to ask the right questions to spark the right insights for, self insights that your mentee may have. Um, you're often doing things to support a person's career direction and sharing experiences and whatnot. Sometimes you're connecting your mentee to others in the organization that can help them. So you're acting as a bit of a connector. So I think there are differences. But when you're mentoring, there are elements where you may be doing a little bit of coaching as well.
Yeah, yeah. I'm thinking about who I'm talking to. So, there's a question that's forming in my brain as you were talking, and it's really around the networking side, right? And networking at all phases, right? And I'm talking C-suite, the VPs, as well as mid-journey. But I also want to ask this question through the lens of diversity, because part of the unconscious bias phase that we went through over the last few years, et cetera, was, people were comfortable with the individuals that they know, right? And they didn't know that conscious or unconsciously they were gravitating towards that, even in certain selections of, next job for whoever they were hiring, et cetera. And so I'm looking at the question through the lens of the value of networking to help break that unconscious bias. Because if they don't know you, people are going to gravitate to who they know. So how do we look at networking? Is it a requirement today? Is it still a requirement in job success, et cetera, or whatever the endeavor that a person's looking at? But I also want to see what your reflection is through the lens of diversity.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And, networking, no one's going to force any of us to be out there networking. But I think your question, so it's not a requirement, yet at the same time, your question is deeper than that, where it really gets at, in order to help you realize your potential, is networking important? And I think absolutely. Um, it's really those kinds of introductions and exposure are really give you an edge up in terms of being able to learn new things, get exposure to different parts of a business that you may not have, and in fact may end up being the way you get your next job. So like I've always been fortunate where, I'm very far into my career. I've sort of left the normal corporate thing. And as you mentioned up front, I'm sort of, in that new phase where I'm doing more things on my own, whether it's, coaching or some nonprofit work and I still do a little bit of consulting, but I've been fortunate over the years where I never applied for a job. And a lot of people are like that because, it was through relationships, it was through networking that you did. Like most of it was through former bosses that have gone to other companies, but some of it was true networking where, I developed a relationship with, a specific person. And when that individual heard of an opportunity in their company, they just thought of me.
Yeah.
And made introductions and so forth. So I do think it's incredibly important. And, each of us are probably not going to be able to, optimize like what our career potential is if we just focus on hunkering down and just doing a good job. Doing a good job is really important. It kind of gives you that credibility and platform to, to do more, but it's not, that alone is not enough. Then when you add the diversity component to it, there's a lot that I have to say around that, because it's the one good thing is that I think in the last like maybe 3 to 5 years, that's really evolved a lot, where I think leaders are much more conscious about expanding their network, because it is traditionally, you alluded to this a little bit, Charles, where people kind of go in their swim lanes of what they're comfortable. It's not like there's no bad intention. It's the unconscious kind of bias that we all have to a degree. But it's the people that we're familiar with and whatnot. I do think that over the last several years, there's been a lot of enlightenment where leaders realize it's almost their obligation to get out of their normal, swim lanes. And they have to meet people, who bring different, come from different backgrounds, and bring different perspectives. When I was working at Comcast, one of the things that I tried to do is be a bit of a model for that. So the ERGs in a lot of companies are very important. I was actually the kind of the executive champion of the APA ERG at Comcast, but I was a member of BEN, the Black Employee Network, because I wanted to emulate that. I need to kind of, be involved in other things that are out of my normal, swim lanes and so forth. So I think it's almost an obligation, because what we should all be trying to do as leaders in the organization is to elevate all voices, and give all people who want to advance their careers the opportunities to do that. And you can only do that if you if you cast a wide net.
Yeah, it's funny, right? Because we throw programs, and we it's multi-ethnicity and communication, right? And sometimes you see different ethnicities, different demographics. They're like, I don't know. It seems like you guys cater to. Like, no, we sit down with everybody. And someone said, Charles, you know what? Sometimes we may have to switch it up and meet people where they're at, instead of trying to have them come to where we're at. I said, you know what? That makes a ton of sense. So we stop saying, or we didn't stop. In addition to saying, let's partner together, we said, you know what? Let's just attend different people's events, so that way they know we're here for them. And then maybe over time it'll become a partnership where they've seen us in the room. But it goes to the point that you're making, right? You have to go out of your comfort zone, go into others, because otherwise, how do you break the cycle? And if you're a hiring executive, forget manager, executive, sometimes they've been around long enough to meet enough people, but maybe early on, managers to a certain level, that comfort is rooted in until it's shaken up, right? And so a lot of times when we are having events, we try to say, demographically speaking, get everybody in the room, let them network, let people get to know each other, because all of a sudden you realize we're all the same.
That's
slightly
exactly
different in pigmentation, right? But we're all the same. We all have the same daggone issues. We got aging parents, our bodies ache at a certain point in time. We have kids that are out there being rock stars and excelling. We're happy for all of that, right? And we share those. And over time, we create relationships that all of a sudden you are having that conversation where a person says, such and such was in the same industry. Let's bring that person in for an interview, or at least let them know that there are opportunities out there. And that's the value of that networking that takes place. So I'm definitely there with you.
You nailed it, Charles. And I just have to kind of chuckle, because those three things that you mentioned around the aging parents, I went through that. As I mentioned, my parents are no longer with me, but went through all of that. Then the aches and pains, I've dealt with that in my life. Unfortunately, I'm on a pretty good track now, but not completely out of that. And then, the kids that, fortunately, knock on wood, mine are doing great. But there's always like, highs and lows with that. So we definitely are all the same. You mentioned early when you were introducing me, we met through the Name It conference last year. So I do have to, thank NAMIC. I am an ELDP grad. I was in the first ELDP class. I think I was number 12 that when it got moved over to Darden, at UVA, and that was a great experience. I met great people that I'm still in contact with today. When Marge introduced us last year at the conference, she and I were co-presenting. We did a thing on personal branding. So, so it's just great to get out. I love that conference because you just get to meet, a wide array of people.
And it goes back to that same statement of network, right? We were networking and figured out how we can help each other out in
That's
terms
right.
of, I want to talk about your philanthropic and, in your nonprofit. Let's, talk to me about it. What's going on in that world?
Yeah. So thank you for asking that. And I've been on various boards, throughout my life and whatnot. And I took a break for a couple years because I really wanted to really think hard about what was the right kind of nonprofit to support. And I'm so lucky in Philadelphia that something fell into my lap where I've become like a partner is the terminology we use for an organization called Social Venture Partners. They have a Philadelphia chapter. My guess is they probably have an Atlanta chapter because they're in a lot of the major cities. Social Venture Partners was started, I think, maybe in Silicon Valley or Austin or something like that, kind of in the tech space. Each chapter gets to choose what its mission focus is. Most of the chapters, from my understanding, revolve around helping improve systemic poverty. And that's right where the Philadelphia chapter is focused on. And for me, Charles, it just nailed it because I mentioned at the opening that my mom was a social worker. And so I've always had that exposure about thinking, about people who, were less fortunate. And it very well may be, it's usually actually through no fault of their own. It's, circumstantial and whatnot, where they were, born in a bad zip code and maybe, didn't have as quite the parental support or something, or, had some sort of health issue. So Social Venture Partners is focused on reducing systemic poverty through a lot of different programs and whatnot. There's one particular organization within the network of nonprofits that we support within Social Venture Partners called Resilient Coders, and I'm kind of the lead partner supporting Resilient Coders. It's a great organization that provides a free 6-month software coding boot camp. And it's typically younger adults that are in lower paying jobs, and they actually get to go through this coding boot camp. They actually get a stipend because it's full time. They can't work while they're doing it, so they need living expenses. And I'm very involved with the executive director there, who's a fabulous person. We're very excited through Mackenzie Scott. Resilient Coders just got a $2.5 million grant. So that was really, heartwarming. So, the financial, stability of the organization, is on really good footing. So that's where I'm spending my time.
I have to ask you help with the Run for Babies, 510K?
Yeah, I started that with the March of Dimes. Yeah, I was, I actually had my brother had a premature baby, and that was really, really difficult. So that's something, earlier in my life, I was very involved with the March of Dimes. I was on the board for the Philly chapter, and I started an actual run that still exists today. So that's great. Actually, the best thing I ever did when I started that run, I was the director of it, but I recruited a really good team. So it wasn't just about me doing everything, and that sort of has sustained itself. So that's really also very fulfilling to see that continue on.
We were talking about that full cycle, and it's funny, not just from your parents, but even your undergrad studies. Everything's come full cycle. You're still dibbling and dabbling in economics, still dibbling and dabbling in computer science with the coding, social work, etc. All of that it had a much more profound imprint on your life. You know, at least I'm seeing it, because I'm seeing everything that you're doing sort of is a spinoff of these things. What's next? What's inspiring you right now that you're saying, you know what? And it may be what you're doing right now, but is there anything there that you're saying, I want to dip, dabble, I want to put my toe in this, because it's just another one of my passions. So I'm just asking, what's next for Clem?
Wow. Well, first of all, that whole circle that you're talking about, thank you, because it does feel right. Like, and this is a little bit of a counseling session you're giving me here, Charles. So thank you for this, and a very positive one, may I add. In terms of what's next, I think there's kind of a couple paths. I think one would be continuing and just amplifying, elevating the things that I'm doing now. I feel really good about the balance of how much I'm working, how much I'm spending time with my family, my wife, and so forth, as well as the nonprofit work and whatnot. So I think that's in a good flow. Yet at the same time, you can probably tell that I still have a lot of energy. And so is there anything other bigger that might happen? I don't know. It's very possible. I'm sort of keeping things open around that. Could it be a little bit more entrepreneurial or something, perhaps? I think I'm enjoying the moment and still going to remain open to figuring out, like, more of what I can do to just be my reach my potential in terms of my full self.
Well, Clem, we appreciate you coming on. I mean, like I said, when Marge made the intro, I knew there were layers upon layers upon layers that you could peel back. And you always let us know if there, or me personally, if there's any way I can help with any of the passion roles that you're working on right now. As I'm starting, as I'm getting older, the 50s are different, the 50s, what I've learned is that you start really thinking about how do you apply your energies and where you're giving your energy to outside of what you have to do for your 9 to 5 to pay the bills. Because, there are a lot of people watching, especially our kids, and legacy matters, right? For me, I want my kids and my grandkids to look and say, you know what? Dad, or whatever they're going to call me, the grandkids eventually, not now, but eventually will call me or say, you want it to be something positive. Steve White says, in Uncompromising, his book, when you pass away and you're in a stadium and people are talking, will they say something good about you? Will they say something bad about you? Or will they have absolutely nothing to say to you about you at all? We know you're not in that third camp. You're doing way too much. You're giving back, a ton, and we appreciate that, from multiple communities. So thank you for joining us.
Charles, it was an absolute pleasure. You're very gracious, and I'm so fortunate that Marge introduced us. And thank you for the work that you're doing with NAMIC, and in all the circles that you play to help bring others along and develop others. It means you're making a big impact.
I appreciate that, sir. Thank you, especially coming from you. Thank you.
All right. Have a good one. Take care.
You too.